We're talking with Randy Mearns, who was about to visit Detroit here. He's bringing a St. Bonaventure's team into the Motor City coming Saturday. And the first question I have to ask you, you took the job at St. Bonnie's in June of 2017. It was a rebuilding program. And we're going to talk about your career. But last week you had your first win as the coach there. Mm-hmm. That's the easiest place to start. That's got to be a step up and it must have been a party that night.
Well, no, actually, matter of fact, we're in time of COVID and we wanted to try to make sure we get to Detroit. So, but I got to tell you, it was such a thrill, to get our first win. And we knew it was going to take a little while, just more from a strategy that, that first recruiting class that we brought in to build the foundation at St. Bonaventure, in discussions with Tim Kenny, our athletic director, who's a phenomenal lacrosse guy, was, how we're going to build this. I'm just going to bring in freshmen. So we brought in 34 freshmen. We had one transfer that was going to be a sophomore, and we had who's currently our volunteer coach, Nick Clinton, as the lone senior, kind of herding around cats. But, when we went through the recruiting process, the freshmen all knew that we were going to take some lumps. But as we went through the process, as soon as they're juniors, which is obviously now, we're going to have taken a lot of smacks across the mouth and we're going to be better for it. And then over that period of time, we have 20 of those guys remaining. Our foundation is absolutely solid. We've taken our licks, but we've grown through the entire process. Again, plug some gaps, plug some holes with the current sophomore group, and then obviously a freshman group. And, we just wanted to stay at it and just try to continue to get better every day. I got to say, Coach Connors, our offensive coordinator, Nico Capron, our defensive coordinator, have done a hell of a job, within those two segments of the game. And, and then we got into Quinnipiac and we just kind of felt really good about our group. We're bigger, we're faster, we're stronger. We had all that experience and we kind of played, relatively speaking, almost a flawless game. And it was just great to see our guys celebrate at the end of it, of all that hard work for 2.5 years to see some success. As you well know, Greg, I mean, the tough part about that is repeating that against Detroit this weekend, especially when they have all this great video on us of everything that we do.
Right. But if you don't have some success at some point within that program, it's either you're growing or you're dying. And I don't think there's much in the middle. I think that's
I agree with you. Absolutely.
What was the impetus for Bonaventure to make the lacrosse a varsity sport? What was the idea?
Well, yeah, it was actually a lot of people don't know this, but it was actually a varsity sport from 1989 to 1993. Okay. Previous to that, it was a pretty good club program back in the day. You remember the 80s, a lot of club programs. So. And they had built it for about 5 or 6 years, and then it became varsity status. And then it was there for 4 to 5 years. And then in 1993, men's ice hockey, which was a varsity sport here at St. Bonaventure, and men's lacrosse ended up getting eliminated for a variety of reasons, as far as I understand it, right? The A10 conference didn't have hockey or lacrosse. So they wanted to stay structured to the sports that the A10 sponsored. And you'll probably remember this, but at that time, there was a big push for institutions to actually start following Title IX. And I think a lot of mid-majors at that time went through that analysis of, well, do you find all kinds of more money to, start women's sports, or do you just eliminate men's sports and then it becomes even? And then that's what kind of happens. So all of a sudden it went away, and there was some club lacrosse for the that next 20 years, and then Tim Kenny took over as the athletic director at St. Bonaventure. He's originally from Long Island. He played lacrosse as a kid. Okay. He was an administrator at Stony Brook and at UMass for a good 20 years. His kids play lacrosse, and when he got on campus, it was again that question of, why don't we have men's lacrosse just geographically? Went through the, all the scenarios and got it passed by the Board of Trustees to, bring on men's lacrosse and fully fund it. And then at the same time, elevate women's lacrosse that was already here and provide them the same resources. So Title IX's all good. And all of a sudden this was this vision. Is there another sport that we can bring on that if you fund it correctly, Northeast, that could be nationally recognized in a short amount of time, whatever that time is. And then can there be a time 6, 7 years down the road where you're vying for national championships because you can get the opportunity to build it? And I was fortunate enough to be the one that gets to, really administer and implement Tim Kenny and Barb Cuesta's vision. I mean, this was the vision. And then then for myself, I had that opportunity of knowing the resources, kind of taking a little bit more chance on myself and saying, you know what, maybe I just start a clean slate. All the 19 years that I've experienced and learned from, and by no means was it perfect, but I can take all that to a brand new program, and then let's just try to get better every day. So we finally got our first win, but we still got a long way to go.
Earlier in this series, we had a chance to talk to Brian Holman, who took over at Utah from North Carolina.
Yep.
And he took over an MCLA program. Well, was there a club team there? And have you talked to Brian and commiserated with what it's like to start a program from scratch?
Not so much with Brian. And there was some semblance of a club program. It wasn't MCLA. It was a bunch of guys that played some lacrosse, and you'd get 7 or 8 guys out at a practice, and then they played 3 or 4 games in the springtime, and it was great. So we basically really actually had to start straight off from scratch, so for us, I never really had the opportunity to talk to Brian about it. I mean, I talked to Brian Fisher, I talked to Torp, some of those guys, and how they kind of built it. But for me, I was as we were building, and this is what the alumni want to hear, and it's the right thing. This is really the rebirth of a program, that was already here 27 years ago.
Right.
And in my brain, I was kind of like, you know what, let's build it. Let's try to build it right. That first recruiting cycle, the 1 year, basically I just recruited, I recruited that first class myself. And for myself was trying to find the guys with all the experiences with Team Canada and position specific and lefties and righties. And you kind of go through it. It's like, I'm going to try to, build the program like I'm building a national team. And, you start off with goaltenders, and then you got to have face-off guys. And then you got to have your two-way guys in the middle. And then you got to have your close defense. And you kind of get to build that. And, and then it was, okay, then in year 2, as we got more scholarship money, let's plug the holes or the gaps from the first year, and then year 3 on the tier. And, we're excited with the 2021 class, because at that time we're going to be a fully funded program, just like Syracuse and North Carolina and Duke.
I usually don't ask this question until later in the interview, because it's one of those sort of collective questions, but you're talking about recruiting. Mm-hmm. You've been on the recruiting trail a lot over the last 3 or 4 years. If given the choice between athleticism and IQ, and having played at the level you've played, yes, you want both, but if you had a choice between those two, and I've asked this of almost every coach. I haven't asked it of the players, but I've asked it of the coaches. I just wonder what your thoughts are.
God, yeah. It's that's kind of that's a tough question. I kind of feel like they go hand in hand. Now, if I was going to reflect on me, personally, as I was kind of a young buck and growing up, I mean, I was all 5'9" and $150. So for me, it was more about lax IQ and already knowing the next play, and then being real quick and fast, so you couldn't catch me and hit me because you just put me through the boards, kind of thing, right? I got to think that it's probably, it's probably got to be somewhat position specific, I think. I mean, from a defensive standpoint, I mean, you got to have guys that can play. I mean, at the highest level of Division I, I mean, you got to have footwork, you got to have explosiveness, you got to be able to get in a guy. And that's typically that 6'1", 6'2" defensive midfielder. You can have all the tool set, all the assets from a close defense standpoint. Sure, you're going to have your 6'4", 6'3" guys that can move, but every once in a while you need that 5'10", 5'9" guy that can maybe match up against a guy like a Joey Sankey, and so I think there's got to be some physicality to it. I think the game's evolved more and more, kind of like the box game, a lot more pick and roll, a lot more slip pick, a lot more slow, we're going to work this dodging kind of set, and can you cover it? And then with quick ball movement, I think that you got to have some very, very good lax IQ to know the next look without really knowing the next look. And so I probably would say more from a defensive perspective, it's more about physicality. Now, you still got to have some lax IQ in terms of the slide packages and the personnel. But I think the offensive side of the ball, you don't necessarily need to be the biggest guy. You don't even need to be the best athlete to contribute to an offense. And we kind of joke about this, from a Team Canada perspective. I remember talking with T. Ray and Brownie and Jason Levesque about this. This was back in 2014. And when we were going through the analysis and we're like, hey, how much do we want to ride against Team USA? Like, we got to have these young guys to ride. We got to get the ball back. And then you kind of realize that Mark Matthews is 6'5", 225. He's got hands of gold. And quite honestly, at that level, does it really matter if Mark Matthews can run a 4.40? No, it really honestly doesn't, right? And so that's probably where I would kind of, fall off on that question.
There are only two coaches that answered it by position, you and Matt Brown of Denver. Everybody else got kind of stumped because they wanted both, but it wasn't an either or. It was, you have your choice. So I put you in a category with, obviously, some pretty smart coaches, because I think you have to break it down by, you think about goaltending, you really need IQ. You need somebody that's really smart. And
absolutely. And that was, quite honestly, when I started this journey, I was recruiting Brett Dobson to Canisius at the time. And then obviously I made the transition, but he was going to PG a year at the Hill Academy. And I remember going on my first recruiting trip. I went to Pittsburgh, New York, to watch the Sweet Lax Invitational. And it was pretty amazing because I only had 1 year to recruit. So it was June 22nd. I actually got St. Bonaventure gear on for the first time. That was really, really weird. And you go. The interesting part with so much lacrosse happening in North America, Canada, and then the world was I went to, at that time, and I think it was the 2018 field, like the kids that are going to be seniors. And at the field, there was a lot of Division III coaches, and there was a lot of Division II coaches. There wasn't a single Division I coach because everybody was already done, right, the kids. And I was sitting there going, oh my God, there are so many phenomenal kids that still haven't found a home just because there's a limit to the roster spots in Division I. So I felt good about that. And I'm like, okay, I think I can do this. I'm going to hit the trail, right? Let's see what we got out here. There's some incredible kids that are still looking for a home. And then I'm driving home, and all of a sudden it dawned on me. I'm like, okay, Brett Dobson's the first phone call. Because he played for the Hill Academy, played for Brody. I'm like, this kid's like legit. I mean, if I'm going to start, let's start with goaltending. I called Dauber on the phone. I said, listen, obviously you knew that I'd started a new position at St. Bonaventure, but I'm like, listen, you got to come see this place, man. It is beautiful. It's incredible. It's in the rolling hills of the Allegheny. It's got the facilities. It's got the family relationships. It's got the AD and the senior women's administrator that are lacrosse people. Like, we're going to fully fund this thing. And I want you to come share a dream with me. Like, come here, but I don't need you in 2 years. I need you next year. And then that next weekend, he was the first kid that we had up on campus, and that's where we started.
Do you recruit the players the way you played, or do you recruit players the way your offense and the way you vision the program to run?
Yeah.
Especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Well, it's the offensive side of the ball, and you kind of sit there and say, hey, can you have some guys that are alley dodgers or can evolve into the pick and roll game? More and more, Americans are playing box lacrosse. I mean, with obviously U.S. box lacrosse getting started with Shaden Santos and Brownie, and that thing's clicking, and that thing's never, ever going to stop. Right. You got a lot of Canadians that have ended up living down in the States, Kevin Crawley teaching box lacrosse. And so there's this big box kind of influence, but from a recruitment standpoint, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try to figure out, it's that first class. Like, I didn't need 7 right-handed attackmen. I only needed 2. Right. And then which 2, but how I went with this, Greg, was is for me, everything is about what kids are dreaming about. You know, we all been there, you know, when we were 13, 14, 15, I had my own kind of coming up, and I had some good role models to follow. And so for me, as we went through the recruiting process, was a couple of things. Well, I like this individual. He's good. He's big. He's fast. He's a midfielder, whatever the metric might be. Is, well, one, do we actually have an academic degree that suits you? And if that checked the box, well, can we get you in? Well, then that checked the box. Means you probably get through the eligibility center. That checks the box. And then it kind of came into, all right, well, how are we going to do it here? Resources, academic, stacking. We can make a package for you and your family if we're interested in you. If you're good academically, odds are you're not going to be a pain in my butt when you're on campus. And then we got all those 5 boxes. And then I would just ask the young men and say, what are you dreaming about? And as you kind of went through it, if they didn't tell me that they wanted to be drafted by the Toronto Rock or the Buffalo Bandits or the MLL at the time or the PLL at the time, quite honestly, I wasn't that interested, because I'm like, listen, if you're not dreaming about being Graham Hosack or Rob Pinnell or Brody Merrill or Dylan Ward, then you know what? I don't know if we can marry our dreams together, because since I know as we build this, and I know it's going to take a little bit of time, we're going to be a fully funded program like everybody else. And once we start having some success, maybe those blue chip recruits, maybe they're from Canada, maybe they're Syracuse and Rochester, maybe we can give them a better deal and come down to Bonaventure. And at the end of the day, since we're going to be fully funded, why aren't we talking about trying to win national championships here? Because if you have all the resources, that's what you should be talking about. You know, and as much as I kind of started the recruiting process where guys would sit there, and I don't know this for a fact, but kind of go, Coach Mearns, like, you're kind of crazy, man. Like, you know, that can't happen at St. Bonaventure. But it's the same thing when you look at a 16-year-old that says he wants to be better than Graham Hosack. And I would sit there and say to the young man, going like, so if you told your friends right now that in 6 years you're going to be better than Graham Hosack, what would they say? And they'd go, Coach, they'd probably like laugh me off the chart, right? Right. And I would sit there and say, right, but does it really matter what they believe?
Welcome back to another show of Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We're lucky enough to have with us for show 43, Randy Mearns, who's the head coach at St. Bonaventure, a legend in his own time, and certainly one of the best indoor players that ever picked up a stick. I want to go all the way back to St. Catharines, and you started in St. Catharines. I'm assuming hockey and lacrosse were a mix.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's that's the first love. You know, you start skating around on the pond out front of your house, or, you know, down on a field or down at the lake, and, you know, you're 4 or 5 years old and you go. And I mean, I'm going to date myself. I'm 52. So God, like, you know, it was hockey night in Canada for me. I mean, you just waited for that. And that was always either the Leafs and the Canadians or the Leafs and the Bruins. And, you know, sometimes you get the Montreal feed with Danny Gallivan doing the play-by-play, and boy, you just wanted to try to be, you know, Daryl Sittler and Rick Vive, and you just like dreamt about being those guys. And, you know, and then you played and you tried to, you know, emulate those guys, you know, in your performance. And, you know, at the same time, it was that natural fit where, unlike today, where it could be lacrosse 24/7, 365, if that's what you want to do, you know, or hockey, you know, you played hockey in the wintertime, and then you played lacrosse in the summertime. And that's just, you know, the ice melted and, you know, the rink was ready, and then you just, you know, filtered into the lacrosse arena. And there was a lot of crossover with the guys that you played with, hockey and lacrosse. You know, there wasn't a lot of hockey guys that played soccer or played baseball, because at the end of the day, if you're going to like play more of a violent sport, well, why wouldn't you kind of play lacrosse in the summertime kind of thing? And yeah, so hockey was really the first passion, you know. But then, you know, for myself, probably like every young Canadian now, if all of a sudden you get to 14, 15 years old and, you know, and you're not drafted to the OHL, odds are you're not going to the show. And then
Right.
you might want to reevaluate what your options are. And, so for myself, that happened to me. I got to that point, I had hurt my knee, and, by no means was I that good, but you had those dreams and aspirations. But, sooner or later you got to make choices. And for me it was like, you know what? The hockey thing's absolutely not happening. Hey, I wonder what's going to happen with this lacrosse stuff that we're doing.
Well, I'm 14 years older than you, and we played box lacrosse. I was a Windsor Spitfire goalie. So
Okay, yeah.
we played box lacrosse because we didn't want to, but we played it because we were stuck having to stay in shape for the winter. It was the opposite effect. And it was a time when if you're an American to come to Canada and play, you lost your scholarship opportunity. And then by the late 70s, they started the Great Lakes Junior Hockey League, and it changed. But
Right.
did dad play lacrosse, or was you were the first?
Yeah, no, he played back in the day, but apparently he told me a story one day that he got suspended for life. I don't know if that was true, but back in his day, because everybody was using wooden sticks, apparently he, cracked some 12-year-old across the head, and that was the end of his lacrosse career. So I don't know if he was frightening me of like, don't do that.
Right.
But quite honestly, how I got into the game is really, I mean, the big influence in my life, growing up was my brother Rob. He's class 7 cerebral palsy. He's got a bad little chicken wing and a skinny left leg, but he started box lacrosse, and he was a goaltender, right? Just like he was in the nets, and that's the position he could play. And I remember being 4 or 5 years old, and he was playing. Obviously we go down to the arena, and this young guy, his name was Breen Snurk, came up and basically kind of like, said, hey, like, I play box lacrosse, to you. And I'm like, well, I no, I don't. And then I went home and I said to my mom and dad, well, I want to play. And then that's how I kind of got into the game when I was 5.
You went to Canisius for college, am I correct?
Yep, absolutely.
So you're a box guy. When did Field jump up?
Yeah, got Field jumped up. St. Catharines. I was hanging out with Mike Lyons and got a few others. And where Mike Lyons' apartment was right down the road from this Lakeshore Catholic. And we were like 15 years old at the time, midget lacrosse. And we're seeing all these guys running up and down this field at the high school. So we hopped on our bikes and went down, because we were just like lax rats during the summertime, and going, hey, well, what's this? And it happened to be a guy named Jamie Ward. And there were guys like Mike Meridian and Marty Calder, and these guys playing that were 2 or 3 years older than us, and they were playing U19 field lacrosse. And we're like, hey, well, can we play? And they're saying, yeah, absolutely. So, okay. So that's where it really kind of got interested. Basically, you would play like 5 weekends, and then you would play like in a championship U19, in the fall. So that was the first introduction. Quite honestly, it was really box lacrosse on field.
Right.
Interestingly enough, is then as that kind of went along, I had the opportunity to, a goal of mine was to play for Team Canada. And I had 1988, I was fortunate enough to be selected by Stan Cockerton to, represent Canada in the first U19 World Championships. And that was an amazing experience. And then from that is how I ended up getting recruited to Canisius. When I went to Canisius, though, for the Canadian guys, and at that time, and I don't know about the Gates, because there wasn't really a ton of guys. Marichuk was down, Gates were down. There's probably a few other guys. Remember, no internet. And I remember Coach Van Tyne, God rest his soul, he's a mentor to me. He tried to make me use my right hand. And you practiced it because apparently that's how field lacrosse is.
Right.
You got to keep the stick to the outside and this, that. And you kind of went through for 3 or, in my time there. But when we ever played in a game, there was never even a smidgen of me thinking ever about using my right hand. So the interesting part, so it was like all this field, alley dodges, pops, rolls, cut throughs, and very dynamic. So, wow, this is how the game needs to be played. And maybe it's cyclical, because at the end of the day, the stuff that I played when I was 15, 16 is reminiscent of the stuff that's being played at the highest level right now. But it took about 10 to 15 years, maybe 20, for it to kind of come all the way around. and again, when, with myself included, when coaches recruit the Canadian kids, nobody's teaching anybody to try to use their weak hand. No. We're going to utilize you because you know how to do that. And, or the Native Americans that play box lacrosse. I mean, just the stick skills, being a one-handed player. I mean, it's absolutely amazing to watch, the stick skills of some of these guys.
When I was first involved in this sport, I got a chance to ask, somebody asked me when I lived in San Diego if I would help out with lacrosse. And I said, well, where's the rink? I've mentioned this story a couple of times. Right. I literally got to go to the library and get a book out of, better lacrosse for boys because it's played on a field. Well, you emulate the drills and everything a lot of it was one-handed. I always use, and you go back to 2006 at Western Ontario for the FIL championships. Yeah. If you could watch Jeff Snyder in the second half of the championship game against the Americans, in which Gary scored, I think, 5 or 6 games.
He ended up getting 4, which is beauty.
4. But if you watched Jeff play in that second half with one hand, primarily, and then somebody's going to tell me you got to have 2 hands to play the game. If you got a 97% chance of being, especially at the high school and the college, lower to college level, you got a 97% chance of being effective right-handed and a 4% chance of being left-handed. As long as you're not so I think sometimes that gets lost in transition.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the, just at least at the level of international level, with you get with obviously the Iroquois and Australia and England and obviously Team USA, and you kind of go through it. But I gotta tell you, and even in Division One, when you get into the third and fourth quarter of a game that's meaningful, nobody's going to pull the trigger with their weak hand from 13. The goalies are too good.
Right.
You might as well just give them the ball. So all of a sudden it becomes more like a box lacrosse game because nobody's really going to shoot that in your left hand, right, from distance. Now, I'm not saying maybe in tight, hey, boom, Tommy Schreiber got that with 1 second left, right, from a feed from Rob when we were in Israel. Well, he wasn't in a strong hand because he's a righty, and sure, there's a purpose for it. Don't get me wrong, but anything that's kind of from the outside, I just feel like, everybody's just going to use their strong hands because, to your point, I'm 100% confident in my stick skills 100% of the time in my strong hand. Where that percentage starts to drift down as soon as you put it in your weak hand.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Canisius, what was your study discipline? What did you want to do? I mean, I knew you ended up coaching, but was it a teaching thing? What was it that you wanted to? What's your degree?
Yeah, no, it was. I actually graduated with a finance degree. I did very, very well in the finance program. I figured, I actually transferred to Canisius from the University of Western Ontario. So I'd gone to Western for a year. We actually ended up with, there were some great guys, Joe Masterson and Jeff McComb, the current head coach is Saskatchewan. And countless others. We actually ended up winning a Kufla championship there. And then that's one of the reasons why Jeff and I got the opportunity to go to Canisius. We were young guys and transferred in. But the reason why I went to Western, because I grew up, I was the first person in my family to actually go to university, and I didn't really know what was going on. And I kind of felt like, well, if you go to University of Western Ontario, get a business degree, like they'll just give you money when you graduate. Isn't that how that works? And so I moved that forward to Canisius, got a finance degree, and then ended up coming back into came back to Canada, and was playing a ton of summer ball for Brampton, and then after a couple of good years there, then in Six Nations, and I really just coached lacrosse. My parents were great. I was able to come back for about a year and a half and just kind of mooch off of them, and I'm trying to live the lacrosse dream and do the thing. And then my wife right now, we were kind of dating out of college, and she was from Long Island. And I'm like, okay, well, after a year of the long distance, it's like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, here's what I know. There's no box lacrosse on Long Island, so I'm not moving there. I kind of put my line in the sand, and she said, okay, well then I'll move up. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, well then that's great. She had a condition for me, Greg. She said that I had to get a job. I'm like, I don't want a job. What are you talking about? So I utilized my finance degree and got a job with the Mutual Group, low level, sell insurance to your friends and all that stuff, study for the exam. And I did that for about 6 months. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing this. This is not what I want to do. So I came home and I said to Connie, I said, hey, yeah, I just quit my job. And she like looked at me with this thing of disdain. And I said, no, I'm going to get a better job. And she's like, well, I don't know if I can swear on this, but you're an a-hole. And like, that's BS. And like, you didn't even talk to me about it. I said, don't worry about it. I got a job. It's going to be great. She says, yeah, okay, show me. So I got my resume. I went down to the local Tim Hortons on Hartzell Road and I applied for a job. I applied for the muffin making night job, like midnights.
Okay.
The manager's looking at me with the resume going, wow, like you graduated finance. Are you sure you don't want to be an assistant manager? I'm like, absolutely not. I want to come 4 nights a week. I'll muffin make. You can call me the muffin man so I can go coach and play lacrosse. It was a means to an end.
Okay.
The thing about it is in my hometown, I was the kid that got out of St. Catherine's, blue collar at the time, that got a university degree that is baking muffins at Tim Hortons.
Right.
And and for myself, I took a ton of ribbon, but for me, it was like, no, I want to continue to coach. I want to continue to play. And it was kind of like that means to an end that over a period of time led me to an opportunity back at Canisius at my alma mater to get my grad assistantship. Right. And so I always kind of felt, because I was passionate about the sport. I mean, my parents were great, specifically my mom in terms of give back. So I started coaching the paperweight kids when I was 12.
Right.
And you just love it. You get ingrained into the sport, into the feeling, into the passion.
Thank God, number 4 for the Toronto Maple Leafs, Tim Horton had a donut chain. It might have been a different,
no doubt.
Might have been a different world. But my question is, when you were making muffins, is that when the Rochester guys came from calling? Is that about 94, 95?
Yeah, that's 94, 95, 96. Even when we actually went out to the Mann Cup in 1997 out in Victoria, and the internet was kind of at its infancy, but everybody kind of knows everybody, phone calls at that time. So when we were playing, in the crowd, I could hear every time I touched the ball, the Muffin Man song. And I'm like, come on, like that's just so embarrassing, right? But hey, good on the crowd to utilize some of that stuff to their advantage for sure. But yeah, that was the Rochester days. That was the Six Nations days, right? So at that time, we were all playing like round the clock, for basically 9 straight years.
Prior to the second, it's funny how marketing works. And Marquette was an American Hockey League team before the Second World War, when there was a lot of small teams. My father, who eventually ended up playing for the Rochester Americans for 10 years as a minor league hockey player,
yep,
he brought a New York Ranger coach to Marquette to coach him. His name was Gerald Johnson. And he had, from an accident, his eyes had been taken back and he looked somewhat Asian. Right. So they nicknamed him Ching Johnson. That was the nickname. And the whole point of Marquette was it had a very large Asian community. So they used the name and he used that all the way through. Now today we would call it racist. We would call it a number of things. But the Muffin Man, just an inside baseball thing. 95 was as good a championship as ever. And this you and I may be the only ones talking about this, but talk a little bit about the 95 championship, because it was something.
Which one? Mann Cup or the NLL? Or by that, I guess it was the MLL still, MILL still at that time.
Yeah, outdoor.
95.
Was it the Minto?
So just being involved on, so there was the 1998 World Championship, which was at Hopkins.
Right.
1995 was Rochester Nighthawks versus the Philadelphia Wings.
Yes.
We had one gate, they had the other.
Yes.
The other scored, we lost in OT. That was a bummer. And then in the summertime was Six Nations versus New West out in New West. And that was basically like every typical Mann Cup in that time. The first 2 or 3 games are line brawls, bench brawls, and then the boys get ready to play lacrosse. So which one?
Well, the 2 gates against each other. That's what I remember from that.
Oh, yeah. So, God, I mean, it was, I remember this. It was an afternoon game. It was 2:00. It was at the Philadelphia Spectrum, 18,000 people. I mean, they drew, they had, who was the guy? Chopper. He was always in behind, he was always in behind their bench, not their bench, and behind the penalty box. And it was a back and forth game, an amazing game. And then it went into OT. It was 14-14. And we ended up actually winning the first face-off. I think it was Brian. I want to say it was Brian Silcott won the face-off for us. Sudden death, now known as sudden victory. And
I still haven't gotten over that one.
Right. You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. And so boom, we get it. And we run a great offensive set. Dallas Elliott throws up the big pad because he was pretty moved a lot in the nets. And then they came down and kind of transitioned early offense. And, and Gary just kind of jab stepped and, sniped one past Steve Dietrich over the right shoulder. And it was like, wow, like that just happened like that quick. The funny thing about it is when I look, there's a picture that I'm kind of hanging, I'm sitting there with Chugger. And when you realize that we were all wearing spandex, right? Because for that first 6 or 7 years, everything was spandex.
Right.
We didn't really understand why. Maybe it was part of the branding and the marketing, but they finally evolved away from that.
For us big fat guys, I always appreciated the Wolverines when they came out with the big baggy shorts. When they came out, we didn't have to wear it. It didn't embarrass us anymore. It changes. You were fortunate enough to coach at Canisius for 19 years. Mm-hmm. At the same time having a pro career. That's got to be a great advantage because you're connecting to the game. And if you're a finance guy playing professionally, as a lot of guys did, when I came back from California, the turbos were still here. It was sort of phasing out at the turbos at the time. And it was sort of an up and down kind of world. But I would think coaching all those years at Canisius and then being able to have the opportunity to play it, that's got to be such a great combination.
Yeah, it was for about 5 years. 5 years. Yeah, probably the first 5 years. So when I took over Canisius, I was fortunate enough for the opportunity. I was a grad assistant, and everything at that point was either a part-time assistant coach, part-time head coach, and Coach Greco. And so anyway, as that kind of evolved, Coach Greco, who had been there for 5 years after I had graduated in 92, just kind of was done with coaching college. His kids were going to start coming into high school. And so for him, it was better for his family. He was going to step away. And I got asked by the athletic director, Dan Starr, if I wanted to be the head coach. And I'm like, well, absolutely. And he's like, well, it only pays $1,000. And I'm like, I've been coaching in Canada for 15 years. We're volunteer. Like it's $1,000. I'm figuring like that's 1,000% like upgrade, right?
Right. Super
excited. I come running home. I tell my fiance, which is going to be my wife, Connie, the great news. I'm like, listen, I got great news. Not only am I doing all these other things, I'm now the head coach at Canisius. And she looked at me with this disdain on her face of going like, you need to talk to me about these life-altering decisions. And I said, yeah, but hey, it's lacrosse, I'm passionate about. So anyway, I was able to do that, but I was still working full-time as a financial analyst. I was playing pro. And the good news about being the head coach is I could finagle the schedule amongst the NLL schedule. So I could finagle our Canisius schedule so I can be at all places at all times. And then in 2003 is when I found out that I was going to be a full-time head coach at Canisius. And then through some conversations with my wife at that time, I decided that, playing and coaching, I can't serve two. I got to pick one. Also, I was getting a little bit long in the tooth. You had the young bucks coming up. So how long are you going to survive? Time to move along. And then as we went through that journey, then I basically resigned from my finance degree job because the more I got into the finance and developing clients, I felt the deeper you get in that, you start getting into the money thing, the less likely I'll do what I'm really passionate about because the money's too great. So I set that aside. I said, you know what, I'm going to go focus in on lacrosse and see where this journey takes us.
Yeah. What was the best part of being in Canisius? And one of the interesting things about Canisius is I was trying to think, Bob Lanier for Bonaventure for Detroit is a great connection and a great name at Bonaventure. We had a guy named Larry Fogel. Does that name sound familiar?
Yeah.
He's a local kid who I remember refereeing a high school game. And at the time, I think he was averaging 40 points a game. and I think he led the country in scoring at Canisius as I think a junior, and
Right.
then had a great basketball game. Not that there was a connection. You're obviously coming to Detroit this coming weekend, but what was the best part of coaching at Canisius?
Well, I think there's a couple of good things. I mean, playing at Canisius, I was actually part of like a brand new program under Coach Vantine. Like, so what our guys just went through for 3 years, I actually went through, and so that's kind of brought some pretty good perspective. But I got to tell you, like, but going through that experience and the guys that I went through that experience with, as a player, I'm very, very close with every single one of them because we took our lumps. We had some fun times. We continue to get the better. We're kind of like the godfathers of the Canisius program, so to speak. And I talk to these guys weekly, Jeff Palosoto and, Willie Jordan and Maine Wayne and Brad Engel. Like, these guys are like guys that have influenced, guys that I'll reflect back and ask their advice of what I should do. Then you get to the coaching standpoint. I think the best thing about coaching is you just get to you get to interact and you get to help try to influence and guide young people, through turbulent times. Sometimes, whether it's an academic thing, maybe it's a personal thing, maybe dad passed away. I mean, as a college coach, you go through all these different scenarios that there are times where you don't even know what to do on yourself. And then the best part about lacrosse is you reach out to your coaching brethren because everybody's willing to share. Hey, has anybody experienced this? I got this issue with this. And then as you go through it, to watch these young guys go through a 4-year kind of period, to watch them mature, watch them grow, and watch them be successful, maybe on the lacrosse field, maybe it's more on the academic side, maybe it's on the job front. And I think, for me, the biggest reward is, and it's great, the championships we won 2 when I was still there, and Coach Miyashita won another one in 2018 with, and the program's in good hands, but for me, I think the testament is at least for me, is everything's about relationships, and it's about understanding what these guys are trying to accomplish. And then for us as coaches and as institutions to try to provide every resource that we can that allows them when they graduate to be in the best spot to go live out their goals and their dreams. I mean, us as adults and maybe long in the tooth, we all had our own goals and dreams. We can't really change the script because we've lived our life already. These guys got so much time in front of them. What is it that they truly want to do? Is it, and what are they passionate about? And then if you could help guide that or influence that or give them a sense of direction and a sense of confidence, and then they go and they live that life. I mean, there's nothing like it. And I guess that my wife keeps on gumming me about this. I think when it matters is when the kids that you coach invite you to their wedding.
Right.
The problem is like the kicker is if you have those relationships, you're going to 8-9 weddings a year.
Right.
And you love it. And the kicker is in 1 year, this happened. We couldn't get to 2 weddings. And I'm like, well, we can't go to 2, but we can't go to the other 3 because it's not like, because somebody will feel slighted.
Right.
But that's the testament. I mean, that's of all the wins, of all the, all the things that you can accomplish, it's, I was talking with Rex Lyons, probably about a couple of weeks ago, and amazing man. And obviously his father's Orrin. And when you get to the point of being, 80 and 90 years old and what do you have? I mean, it's your friends, it's your family, and it's your health.
I took over the Michigan State women's lacrosse job and the women's program, having never had a sister nor daughter. And I could tell you, regale you with stories that don't matter other than I had to surrender, just realized that I was dumber than I thought. But in the last 3 or 4 years, the amount of weddings and the amount of showers that my wife has gone to, the same kind of thing. And I value, you value those relationships, and it's really all, it's all that matters.
Right.
You had this Canisius run. Where did Bonaventure come in? Was it them calling you? Was it how did that whole thing come along? And then what was the conversation like with this obviously understanding wife of yours, who must be a saint to say the least?
She absolutely is. She absolutely is. So, well, it's we're from a Canisius standpoint, we got a lot of phenomenal juniors that are going to be seniors. We're close to potentially winning the conference championship. The previous year, with being within the conference, it's, some things that happened within the presidents of the conference where we had some strategic plans that were going to either be put on hold or eliminated. And so it was kind of one of these things to, like, hey, how do we continue to build? I mean, you spend a long time and you go, okay, well, when are we going to be fully funded? And we always got better every year. We got a little bit better. We got a little bit more money, which was great. Keep on getting better. And for me, it was, then all of a sudden there was just this, okay, we got to pause for a couple of years. We don't know what we're doing. The strategic plans, which was kind of a bummer because it led me to then have to go deliver a sandwich to one of my assistants who was going to be coming on full time and saying, guess what? You're not coming on full time. Mm-hmm. He's now currently the head coach at John Carroll University. He's had a great run there and I'm excited for him. And I was frustrated, you being there 17 years and back to Bill Tierney. He's a mentor to all. And I was kind of venting as, you kind of do. And I don't really vent very much, but shooting the breeze. And I remember making a comment to him like, hey, if you ever think that there's, if you ever think that there's a program that I'm going to be a good fit for that want to go fully funded, like, please put my name forward. I'm just frustrated. He calmed me down. Hey, keep working. Okay, great. So in that year, when we had our juniors and seniors, that's when St. Bonaventure announced, like, and so me being at Canisius was, this is great. We're going to have a rivalry. Right. We finally, because we always tried to create a rivalry with Hobart, but Hobart's like, no, our rivalries with Syracuse, like, stop. Right. So I'm like, okay, this is great. And then you listen to the podcast Tim Kenny was on, and they're going to be fully funded and all the visionary, and you kind of go through it. Okay, great. And then I didn't really think anything of it because we're in season. And then season ends. And now it's like the third week or so of May. And I get a call from Matt Brown, and Brownie's like, hey, listen, Coach Tierney put your name forward on a short list for the Bonaventure job. Are you interested? Well, what's going on there? Well, it sounds like they're going to go fully funded, this, that, and the other thing, blah, 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 blah. If you're interested, you need to reach out. So then from there, I've never looked for a job, so for me, then it was, okay, I need to go talk to my AD. Like, how do I do this? Do I do it on the backside? Do I do it on the front side? And Bill Maher, AD, was absolutely phenomenal. He's like, listen, like, you've earned the right to go. We don't want you to leave, but, go research, go. If you want to take a look at it, you should. Right. And then that's when I got the opportunity to meet Tim Kenny. And we met at a Tim Hortons. And he showed me the plan in 5 minutes, the numbers. Right. And then we just talked for an hour and a half, not even about lacrosse or the numbers. We just, and I felt leaving Tim Hortons. I'm like, I could play for this. I could work with this guy. Yeah. He shares the same vision. Right. I'm trying to do something pretty amazing. And then that's where it really kind of started. And then I had a decision to make. Now, this time I had many conversations with my wife. And I didn't sleep for about 3 or 4 days, but it was push come to shove. What are you doing? And then I was just like, you know what? The opportunity is so great. I can start a clean slate. I know what I'm kind of getting into, but I don't. So it's exciting. And we're going to have the resources. So you know what? If my wife's in, let's go take a chance. And now we're 4 years later. It's an interesting road. And now you've got a victory. And that leads to expectation, which is what you're there for, and it kind of moves along. So yep. I think that works. Absolutely. Touch on a couple of things before we finish up. One question I always wanted to ask somebody: when you put on a national jersey or a hat, you're coaching or you're playing for Team Canada. Explain the difference for you between that and maybe any other team you played for. It is different, is it not? Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. You're wearing your country's flag. It's the pride of where we grew up, where we came from. Especially in the sport of field lacrosse. as we, 1978, obviously with Dave Huntley and Stan and Johnny Meridian and the like, beating Team USA in England in OT, hey, maybe that wasn't supposed to happen. It was raining, whatever, but hey, they won. And now all of a sudden, Team USA basically had dominated, through, 1998, 2002. And then it was like, wow, 2006. And you're not supposed to win. Like, it's field lacrosse. We're just a bunch of box lacrosse guys.
Right.
But in 2006, we had a great mix because we had some guys that played field down in the States. We still had some box guys, yeah. Jimmy Moss and Colin Doyle. He didn't really play field lacrosse, right? And so we had a good mix. But the good part about it was Jeff Snyder and Brody and Taylor and Chris Anderson, they just got coached by Dom Starza, Mike Pressler, right. Dave Urich. Right. And so we were just the recipients, right? Frankie Nelson and Dave Huntley, myself, I was part of the defensive coordinator of all these young upstart Canadian kids that just learned field lacrosse down in the States. And so we could actually talk to them about slide packages, and because they just already knew it, right? And so when you kind of go to that saying, wow, can we do something amazing, with a group of individuals collectively coming together that like will just kind of go down in history, especially from a field lacrosse standpoint, where we're not supposed to beat the States. They can put 15 different teams together, and then it all just came together. And then, to your point, and then Jeff Snyder went like 95%, whatever he did on the faceoffs. Yeah. We got up, and then I don't know if Gary was playing possum or not. I'll never, ever know. I don't know if him and Hunts had this thing, because I have no idea. There's a couple of things. There's a couple of things of why we kind of felt like we were going to win that championship game. John Grant Jr. came to the group the day, before the game, and said, listen, Gagliardi is going to shut me off. They're going to press out on me. So I'm going to go and make them press out on me. I'm not worried about scoring 3 and 2. I'm not worried about being the MVP.
Right.
Hey, that says something, right? Now you got Gator and Hunts, and who knows, like you play, England and Finland, and Gary can't score on a breakaway, and he's hitting the goalie in the stick. And we're like, God, and people are going like, is he done? Does he even have any more in the tank? And then the next thing you know, in the fourth quarter, he jab steps and scores 4. Hey, by the way, I'm here. And what a swan song to kind of end that international career. And what an amazing experience, and so every time you get the opportunity, I mean, you're humbled. I've had the opportunity to be involved with it, since 1988, as a player, as an assistant coach, as a head coach. And that doesn't get old when you get to, represent your country, represent where you came from, and try to do something amazing. There's nothing like it.
2006 championships, we were fortunate enough to be there. And my son at the time, who was 14, was in the wrong spot on the sideline. And John Desco was very rude to him. And as we were walking off, I watched Dave Huntley, who was standing behind the fence, come over and put his arm around him and explain to him that, it was very nice, the explanation. If you remember, on the end of that field, they had all those air-conditioned trailers to make everybody cool.
Yep.
They had a little picket fence. He took him inside the fence. I'm making this point because I think up until Dave's death, he was the glue that was Canadian lacrosse. And as an American who played across the border for hockey, Dave was the reason I rooted the rest of that week, because the opening week on the previous Sunday, they lost by a goal to the U.S.
Right. Yep.
And Gary did not have a great game. In fact, at one point, he was sitting in a bucket of ice on the field, and my son walked by and made the comment. He said, "Sir, you didn't look very good. Are you too old?" he was very cool about it, and he moved forward. And we've had a chance to tell that story to Gary himself. But Huntley meant a lot to you, and certainly it meant a lot to. We've interviewed Brody. We've interviewed Jeff. A lot of guys that were there for that. It was the highlight of, at least at my point, a highlight of my career. Talk a little bit about Dave and what he meant to Canadian hockey.
Yeah, I got to tell you, with Dave, he won the gold medal in 1978,
Right.
He's one of the first guys, along with maybe a couple other. I think there was Mike French and Johnny Meridian, but he was down at Hopkins, playing for the Blue Jays, and had his own obviously career, from an NCAA standpoint. And then living in the States, would end up coming, but he was the guy that was always glued into field lacrosse. And again, you have both, because in the late 80s, early 90s, the Eagle League, which is what then was the MILL, which then was the NLL, obviously
Right.
was very involved in that. But he was down in Baltimore, right? So he's down in Baltimore. So he's getting all the field stuff and he's getting all the box stuff. And then from a national program standpoint, is Frankie Nilsson was smart enough to say, hey, Hunts, you need to be a part of this coaching staff. And that was kind of that, evolution in the early 90s and rolling through 1998 in the World Championships. And then obviously all the way through 2006. I remember getting into a debate with Hunts in 2006, because during the preliminary, whether right or wrong, John Grant Jr. and some of the artists, as Hunts would call them, they got to practice their moves. They got to fake in between the legs, throw a one-hander backhand to see if they can go low to high in the top corner, as opposed to just score, right? Just score. And so we had some boisterous guys on the D end, right? We had, Stevie Toll and Darren Wright. Like, we had some guys going, come on, like, you got to talk to Junior. You got to talk to Hunts, because that's BS. Like, we're busting our butts, and these guys are like, playing hacky sack down there. They just like score. So we were in the war room. We call it the war room. And it's the assistant coaches and Frankie, and we're going back and forth. And I'm like, Hunts, you got to talk to Junior. He's got to stop doing this. And we go back and forth. He's like, Mearnsy, they're artists. You got to let them perform the art and all this stuff. And then he kind of like hit me on this debate. And he's like, Mearnsy, like, listen, just answer me this. This was after about an hour of back and forth. If you drop a glass from 11 stories, is it going to break? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, if you drop a glass from 2 stories, is it going to break? I said, yeah. He's like, it's the same stuff, man. Like, and I don't know why he won the debate. He just made me agree with him. And then that was the end of it. And from that, we had this relationship that now we could really challenge each other back and forth. He'd challenge you. He'd throw out something like, why are you picking that guy? I think he's a fraud. Well, if you thought he was really good, are you going to succumb to his line of thinking, or is he challenging, And so he was the glue. He's the guy that brought all these guys together, with Taylor Ray and, in Taylor Ray in 2010. I know with Matty Brown for the 2014, Matty was, he was one of the last cuts in 2010. Taylor was still potentially in his, potentially still could have played in 2010, but Hunts sold him on the fact of like, listen, from a Canada perspective, we need you to be a coach. And then from there, it's kind of like you go through those experiences, and now you look at some of the younger guys, Merrick Thompson and Mark Miyashita, and, when we had Jason Levesque, and now you got Sean Wilkins, and then there's, countless others that are kind of underneath this fold of how the national team's kind of built, where I think now going forward is, there's an expectation now that you really should be at the point where you can just always win, maybe how Team USA used to always feel. And then I think Team Iroquois has continued to evolve, and they're going to be absolutely incredible. And then the other countries continue to evolve and get better in their own right, just because they can pick up, on video of all the coaches talking about all the different disciplines and slide packages. Everybody's just getting better now, and Dave Huntley, transcended though Canada and American lacrosse, because what he meant to us, he meant to countless American guys too.
Sure.
Because he was living down in the States, and we think about him every day, and he's Canada lacrosse.
I heard this before, but I heard it from him, and I continue to use it to this day from 6, and that is, don't make the routine look spectacular. And I always thought that was such a great saying of just finish the play, do what you need to do, and it is really good. Last question, and I'm this is just one of those. You've had both disciplines. You've had the opportunity to be a box player and a field player. The recent merger with PLL, MLL, taking on the Cannons. It looks now there's a structure where if you're a really good lacrosse player, you might be able to have a professional career and make enough money out of it. You think this is a move in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a move in the right direction. Now, does the PLL over a period of time, as there's more notoriety to the players, right? The branding of the players, I kind of feel, does it start to evolve in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, where no, now there's actually a team in Boston and there's a team in Denver, or is it going to continue to be the traveling road show? So I think that's kind of one of the concerns, but it's interesting and it's exciting to see how that's going to evolve. And to your point, you look at some young guys that are coming out over the last couple of years, if they so choose. They all got, relatively speaking, they all got phenomenal degrees. But you know what? If I can just play NLL and play PLL, and if they coordinate schedules, and I got my camps, I got my clinics, I got my branding, and I got my sponsorships, I think a 20-year-old, a 26-year-old, 27-year-old, if they were making $140, $150, what's the rush to really join the real world?
Yeah.
Hey, can I get to that point? Now, I don't think it's millions of dollars yet, but here's the thing. The NHL started somewhere way back in the day.
Right.
So did baseball and so did the footballs. But how I equate it to this is interesting, and it comes all the way back to the recruiting prospect. We went recruiting, and I asked kids, I'm like, so, what are you trying to do? And I got Canadian kids, and this is specific to the Canadian kids. American kids are a little bit different. The Canadian kids, by where they grow up and what team and what center they play in, I know exactly where they want to get drafted before they tell me. Because if they're from the Toronto Beaches or Oakville or Oshawa, they want to play for the Toronto Rock. If they're from Peterborough, they want to play for Paul Day in Philadelphia. If they're from the Niagara Peninsula, Burlington on down to St. Catharines, they're Buffalo Bandits because that's where they go. If you're from Six, you want to go play in Halifax, right? Right now nobody says Vancouver. At least the Ontario kids don't. But you can really start to see. But now all of a sudden, kids are going, man, I would love to actually play in San Diego. Oh, that'd be nice. What about, so now that's the 15, 16-year-olds. The amazing part is when you're looking at a kid that's 8 years old in an arena in St. Catharines or in Ontario, and they talk about being Dan Dawson. They dream about it, just like when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, trying to be Denny Savard or Rick Vide. They're dreaming about it. These kids are 7 years old. They can see it. They can download it. And I sit there and say this, follow a kid's dreams. They're all not going to make it, but sooner or later in 12 years, some of them are going to get to that point, and we're all going to be going, man, we're the foundation guys that really didn't make any money, but look at this sport now, and boy, what a prideful thing to be a part of, as it kind of creates. Now, the other side to that is, when you do that, do you lose the substance of the game, the spirituality of the game, the creator's game, right? And there's a lot of conversations about it, because if it starts to become about money, well, then do we lose that special something that the Native Americans, obviously the First Nations, hold truly and very dear, and we can't lose that. We can't lose that. So how do we balance that out? I don't know. I don't know how we do that, but hopefully there's a lot of people that can have discussions to try to, educate and try to, bring that discussion forward.
Before the merger, we had a chance to interview Steve Gubert, and who's the head of the NLL. And one of the things we talked about was, city familiarity is important to get that the following. But then I look at the ski world where I come out of, and you look at especially Europe, because it's not so much the United States. It is a traveling circus from community to community, and they draw 35, 40, 50,000 to a ski event. and it becomes personality based. It doesn't necessarily become team based because ski personalities, but you don't have any idea what country's the best. PLL isn't far from that premise. You really don't know who. I mean, an Atlas or a whip snake. You have some understanding, but so I think it might be brilliant. I think it may be something that you're following the players. And that's maybe something that the MLL never really understood.
Right. And I think just with, in terms of social media these days, it's about, it's a lot of the young guys, a lot of the young guys coming out of the NCAA, or maybe young First Nation or Canadian kids that maybe don't get the opportunity or decide not to go to school or maybe play in the CUFLA. You see it more and more, and I'm not so sure it's good, but it's the branding. It's the here's what I did. And I kind of feel like this, where, I think it's part of it. I can see why, but maybe I'm more old school. I always looked at it like, listen, do amazing things and let other people talk about you. Don't talk about yourself. Right. For my team here at St. Bonaventure, we got our first win. It's awesome. And I got a lot of kudos, and I got to deflect that to Gil Connors and Nico Capron and Nick Clinton. They did a great job getting our guys ready. Right. But now as we go along and we have success, well, I'm excited to brag about Brett Dobson, because I feel Brett Dobson down the road will be one of these guys that will play in the PLL and in the NLL. I want to brag about Derry Newbrow. They don't need to brag about themselves. I need to brag about them.
Right.
And so I don't know really what that metric is. I was shooting the breeze with Darius Kilgore, and that's and again, talk about, do it all. One of the best players that's ever played the game in all facets of it. And we have these great dialogues. And we had one a few weeks ago of just, where are the games going and why, I guess back in our time, why it was so different and how the games kind of evolved. And is that really actually good for the game, or isn't? We don't know the answer to it, because, other than this, the growth of the game, I feel, is not going to stop ever now. There's too much investment in it. There's too many private entities, providing camps and clinics and recruitment. The NCAA, I mean, tonight, we get to watch a women's D1 game and then get to watch a men's D1 game on ACC Network. And every lacrosse enthusiast in the United States, from 3 years old to 79, is going to watch that game tonight.
Absolutely.
That's where it's gone to. And you can't stop that now, and that's where I think that it got to continue to be this growth, and it's exciting, but to make sure that, maybe we don't lose the tradition of the game as well.
Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you here in Detroit this coming Saturday. Wish you the best of luck, and you've been terrific for the sport, and I can't tell you how much I've appreciated the time spent with you today.
Awesome, Greg. Well, I appreciate the Vine, and go Bonnies. And if you're talking to Coach Colin, tell him our bus is packed and we're coming to Detroit Rock City.